Welcome to this new podcast episode. This episode is a collaboration between Paul Holi, producer of the Maritime Vision podcast, and
Landry Holi, Fairval CEO and podcast producer of Creating Value in Travel and Transportation.
In this series of episodes, we will gain knowledge from experts and professionals in the transportation and maritime industry through innovation.
We will gain insights on how these professionals create value in their sector by leveraging new digital tech such as AI and pinpoint innovation and investment opportunities.
Welcome everyone. Today we are going to record a new podcast episode with Jan van Tiggelen. He is the discipline leader digital transformation at DNV. So you're going to explain a little bit later what is your role. And we are joined by Landry Holi as well. He's the CEO of Fairval, digital solution expert in the travel and transportation industry. So today it will be a quite long episode because we're going to talk about the digital transformation of the maritime industry. It's a quite big topic nowadays. So we're going to ask many questions to you, Jan. So I think you're going to provide us a lot of insight about the maritime industry. So firstly, yes, for sure. I'm sure you will succeed. So firstly, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Jan van Tiggelen. I live in Norway. I'm currently working for DNV in the Maritime Advisory section. Been working for DNV for 11 years. I work as discipline leader digital transformation, so helping ship owners, shipping companies in the digital transformation of their business. I've been working with technical management in the whole my time in DNV. Before I joined DNV, beside this at the moment, I'm also working as part-time as an assistant professor at the university in Norway, in Ålesund, and I teach the topic digital shipping. So it's also with students. Before I joined DNV, I've worked in a shipping company called Höegh Outliners as senior vice president of fleet management. So there I have the practical experience of technically managing a fleet of vessels worldwide. Before that, I worked 10 years in Kongsberg Maritime. Kongsberg Maritime, as you maybe know, is a company that develops and delivers automation systems to shipyard ship owners worldwide. So all kind of automation. I worked there as a project manager and head of department. And before I joined Kongsberg and before I moved to Norway in the Netherlands, I worked 10 years as naval officer. I have my background as naval officer and as a weapon engineering officer. Sailed on frigates and submarines and also as project manager. So that's a little bit my background from my work. I was so lucky when my time in Kongsberg, I was allowed to do an MBA in shipping and logistics, so which also gave me a more insight in what is going on in the shipping industry.
Okay.
So that's a little bit my background.
Yes. And just before we start right into the topic, what does that mean? Like discipline leader, digital transformation? Because on your LinkedIn profile, it's not common to see this title.
It's within advisory. We have started a new section about 1.5 years ago called digital transformation. And somebody within this section needs to be the discipline leader about the knowledge about digital transformation, so that we as DNV, when we help customers, ensure that we have the right methodology for helping them from a DNV perspective. So, that's a little bit the background.
Okay.
But I work on all kind of projects as project manager or as expert in a project where I contribute.
Okay, nice. So let's start about digitalization. So can you give us, like, for listeners, a quite brief overview of what is digitalization in the maritime context?
I would say there are 3 areas. You could speak about digitisation. And this is going from analog to digital. And this is what shipping has been doing on board, right? They have had a lot of, let's say, the old vessels have analog meters, analog stuff, and a lot is going now more and more digital. That's one thing. So going from analog to digital. And then you have digitalisation. This has a lot to do with, as you, for example, see in shipping companies, business process software support. So you have business processes and you ensure that the information is flowing through digital systems, right? So that you have better cooperation, you have better insight in what is going on. This has been going on in shipping for at least 20 years, I would guess. And this is still, many shipping companies are struggling with this, to get good software systems to support the way they work, how they cooperate, how the information is flowing between the vessels and the shore organization. So this is still a big part of the whole digitalization. And then the final step now is digital transformation. So this is more about cultural, organizational, operational change of a shipping company. by using smart integration of digital technologies, processes, and competences. So it's really more about a transformation, which is much more than just digitalization.
Okay.
And then if you look at these three, right, the key at the moment, why digitalization is a hot topic in maritime, I would say there is currently what I would call a digital acceleration ongoing. Why is this? I mean, we now have more and more smart ships, right, where information is available in a digital format. You have, let's say, you have the administration network, the navigation network, the DP network. So all this information that on board is there is digitally available. This was not there before, but now it's more and more centralized on board available. In addition, we see that in safety industries, if you look at if the airline, railway, everything is going towards centralization to get information from all the units and centralized, being able to monitor what is going on, safety, performance, all this kind. And this is also interesting for shipping because this is the third point. In shipping, we have now connectivity. Before, maybe for 5 years ago, it was not so easy to connect this vessel on the ocean digitally to a center on shore.
Yeah.
Because there was no satellite coverage, or when there was coverage, it was extremely expensive. But this is changing, right? What we see now at the moment is connectivity is more and more going to be there all over the world, and the cost is dramatically going down. So now it's possible to connect this vessel to a center on shore. Doesn't need to be a physical center, it can be a virtual center. But then suddenly the option is that you can see all the things that are happening on board, right? Which gives an enormous potential to monitor, to benchmark performance, to see things happening, right? You can have experts on shore monitoring performance in the fleet. It's an enormous potential. And this is now opening up at the moment. So this is what is going on in digitalization and shipping at the moment.
So what you said, it's a good transition to ask you more about, we can say, the different, we can say, innovations we have right now in the industry. So of course we have AI, as you mentioned. What else do we have?
Well, there's a lot going on. I would say one other topic in the shipping industry at the moment is decarbonization, right?
Yeah.
The requirements to reduce carbon issues. And IMO and also EU are going to put enormous requirements on shipping companies. And this is also a lot of reporting requirements. They need to get an oversight of their emissions, right? And they need to be able to report it. And this is very time consuming. So here they need digitalization, right? They need to get the data from all the systems. They need to combine it in a database. They need to be able to transfer it, report it. It needs to be verified by third parties so that the data they provide as evidence is correct. So all this is also pushing digitalization and data management. So this is one big driver. And there's a lot development around how to handle this data, how to make sure you have good data quality, data infrastructure. This is pushing already the industry. Then, of course, we have MAS, Maritime Autonomous Surface Ships, right? This is remotely controlled or autonomous operation. There are more and more projects coming. So this is also pushing the development of technology in shipping.
Okay.
For sure, there's a lot more, but these are the two things that come up in my mind.
Great. Thank you for this insight. Landry, you can go.
Yeah, I have just to jump on your those points. I'm very interesting to understand more how you see the value creation from those technologies. Maybe, I have a list of technologies I would love to ask you, but let's just pick a couple of them. The first one, which you mentioned, was around autonomous shipping. How do you see that, the upside and potentially the downside of in terms of value creation with this technology?
Well, the upside with shipping, if you look at the operational expenditure for shipping, right, the OPEX cost, I think depending on the type of vessel and the amount of crew you need, but I would say between 40 and 60% of the OPEX cost is crew related. So if you want to reduce OPEX cost substantially, you will need to reduce crew cost. So if you would manage to automate functions on board, and maybe even in the future go to remotely controlled or autonomous, you can have an enormous cost saving from the crewing perspective. So that is the big, let's say, upside. The other way, of course, of this medal is that jobs will be lost, right? There will be less need for seafarers. This is a kind of global issue because I'm involved in projects also in the Far East. And there, when they look further in the future, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ahead, they see that they're going to have a shortage of seafarers. Less and less people want to be away from home so long time. So they can see that, hey, we are forced to look at automation because if we want to continue with maritime transport, and we cannot find enough people that want to go to sea in these circumstances, then they need to automate. They need to see how they can do things remotely controlled or autonomous. And the other side is also what I can see in the industry is, yes, maybe less people will be actually having the same positions on board as they have today, but there will be other positions coming ashore, right? In the control centers, in the shipping companies, where other positions will be created. So it will be also in the maritime organization side. So it will be a big change, a transformation in shipping when this is really going to happen.
Right. And it's really interesting because you mentioned that, with autonomous, so changing the roles, and you mentioned about connectivity. And to which extent, how do you see the industry reacting to the strategic angle of space tech, space data? So how do you observe that? Because at the end of the day, it's going to be very reliant on that type of technology.
Well, I think at the moment, the maritime industry is more looking at it like somebody needs to provide this connectivity for me. And they have to do it in a safe way, right? Cybersecurity, so that the data is secure, not somebody can remotely interrupt with your operation, or that sensitive data gets lost or gets into the hands of somebody else. But that's how far the maritime industry goes. They rely on other companies developing this technology and providing this functionality. That's how it is at the moment. But the connectivity is really key to get this going, right? Because at first in the maritime industry, there was a big push towards, okay, now autonomous vessels are coming. And then I have the feeling that the projects show that was not that easy and it's taking more time than expected. And now companies are saying, okay, but let's go to remotely controlled first and then crew on board. But all depending on connectivity solutions.
And do you
that is yeah.
Sorry.
No?
Yeah. So because I wanted to ask you then, because you mentioned about cybersecurity, which is, if you put autonomous shipping, space data that could be hacked in a way, I can imagine cybersecurity should be the number one topic on the agenda in those type of project. Is it the case, or do you think that still companies are?
I would not call it the number one. The number one is to get the technology functioning, assuming that the connectivity is there. That's the biggest challenge at the moment. But at the same time, there's of course an enormous focus on cybersecurity in these projects, right? I mean, the company where I'm working, DNV, we are building up an enormous organization around cybersecurity. We have acquired a major European company around cybersecurity because this will be a major topic for the future, right? So the technology to do this, to make it really safe, companies are working on that. And there are regulations for cybersecurity coming in. But this is a tough task because a lot of people don't really understand what it's all about, right? Especially for these projects. So it will be, of course, highly on the agenda. And when they're going to verify and when shipping companies have to show evidence of equivalent safety, they need to provide evidence that it's safe, right?
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Last one from me, Paul-Louis. It's so interesting. You talk about decarbonization initiative, which is one big things. 2050 is almost there. What are the key domains where you think digital can really help that transition to your view?
Well, there are many aspects if you look at decarbonization, right? You have the big issues about what kind of engines, fuel, what kind of propulsion will we have, right? That are the bigger issues. But at the start, because we don't suddenly change from a fleet of maybe 40,000 vessels to completely new all, right? So there needs to be transition and that a lot of vessels will continue for 10, 15, 20 years. So ship owners need to look at the energy efficiency of their vessels, right? They can already do a lot. If you look at the big container liners, right, they started for I think already 10 years ago, to have focus on fuel consumption, right? Maybe not from a, let's say, environmental perspective, but more from a financial perspective. They have been building control centers to monitor the fleet on energy efficiency, right? And they have done this digitally. So in the center, they got data from all the vessels about fuel consumption, about hull fouling, about propeller polishing, autopilot, route planning, all the operational issues that have an impact on the fuel consumption, they are monitoring remotely. And they could save, I mean, the big container liners, they go full speed, right? Or maybe quite high speed, right? Big vessels, a lot of engines, a lot of fuel. They could save up to 10, 15, 20% of fuel, right? I mean, I visit shipping companies that was saving $40, $50 million a month, right, on fuel consumption. So if you can do that, this money has then been used to develop this control center. And then they saw, this is working quite well. We can monitor consumption. We see what goes on the vessel. We can train the people on board, centralized on how the best operation works. We can put more functionality in this center. We can introduce performance management. We can look at maintenance. We can look at safety, right? This is how it is developing. So that's what is going on.
Quite interesting. So talking about projects, maybe can you share some successful projects we have in the maritime industry related to digitization?
Well, I would say the container liners, right? The big ones like Maersk, CMA, MSC, they really have done successful projects with a control center physically, monitoring the fleet, getting data from the vessels, and really use this to reduce fuel consumption, right? This has been an enormous success. And they have slowly started building these control centers with more functionality in it. But there are other projects that I know of. I can just pick one, Ocean Infinity. I'm not sure if you heard about it, but they actually, they're building a fleet of remotely controlled vessels, right? Big vessels. It's not small. It's like 80 meters long. They have a control center developed in Southampton, and they're developing technology to really start using. They still have crew, but the plan for the future is to develop functionality where they remotely can control these vessels and reduce the amount of crew. And not only that, but they do a lot of underwater operations, right? Underwater surveys with all kind of robotics. The complete operation of this, they do remotely from a center, right? So in the old days, you had a lot of people on board that need to monitor all these systems underwater, monitor the data, work on this data that is coming up. And they now all do this remotely from a center. So this is, from what I can see, really a big project where they're really pushing technology. They are pushing regulations because it's quite complex. That's one. Another example that I can see in Norway, and we maybe come back to that, but the Norwegian Road Administration, they are the ones who hire ferries for ferry crossings. They give contracts to ferry companies. There's a new one coming up for Lavik-Oppedal. This is an 8-year contract where they have to provide 4 environmentally friendly ferries, big ferries. Here, they have put up a specification for autonomous functionality. So these ferries will operate completely autonomous, both from the navigation side and from the machinery side. Right? This is part of the specification. They still will have crew for safety purposes, but in order to develop technology, they have put these requirements, right? So it's been a big contract, maybe costing quite some money, but they're really pushing the industry both on the technology side and on the regulation side.
Okay.
I think this is a very successful initiative, at least where the government is supporting the industry, because this is what really is needed, right? There are many other projects, some I cannot talk about because they're quite confidential, but I see a big push in mass technology development projects at the moment.
It's interesting, and you mentioned a lot about efficiency gains, cost reduction. One of the things that the folks, when they watch television, they see sometimes all the crises when there's an accident and so on. Are you aware of any project where there's a ways to improve the safety or the preservation of, if there's an incident on the boat and, you have the sea which is completely black because of oil or whatever?
There are many areas where digitalization can contribute with regards to safety improvement. Well, we had a project with one of the biggest shipping companies in the world in China, and they were looking at incidents, and they could see that more than 50% of the navigational incidents were caused by human failure, human error. So if you would be able to develop systems that maybe in the future can automate this navigation, right? Then you could potentially, as long as the systems work, reduce this human error factor quite dramatically. I mean, at the start, they will make systems that may be more on a kind of decision support towards the navigating officer on board, right? So that it can detect other vessels. It can calculate everything around collision avoidance, right? So systems, of course, as long as they work, they do their job, right? So that's an area. But you could also imagine that you have a fleet of vessels and you can get all the information on board, you can get in the center. All the alarms you get on board, you can get in the center. Everything around navigational issues, right? So you can monitor everything and you can learn from this. So everything becomes more transparent, right? Before, in the old days, vessels were away for 6 months and nobody knew what was going on, right? All the problems they've had, or they're not telling what is going on. Now everything becomes visible. This can contribute to improve safety drastically.
Okay.
Just look at piracy issues, right? I mean, that is, you can see where there's piracy activity. You can see where there's weather conditions that could be dangerous for ships. You can remotely monitor and calculate routes and give information to the crew about where to go, where not to go, right? So the potential for safety improvement is really huge.
But it's quite interesting because, of course, in the navigational aspect, we can automate, use AI, etc. Because we can see this with aircraft, for example. But more the machine, because a ship is very powerful, and most of the time you need some engineer on board. Digitalization can help to take the control of the machine and try to fix the issues on board.
Where you can see, for example, and Kongsberg has been doing this for 15, 20 years, right? Where you remotely can log into the systems on board and see what is going on, right? What kind of problems do we have? Before, they need to send a service engineer all over the world. He has to investigate what is going on with the automation system and then maybe conclude, okay, I don't have the correct spares. I have to go back and get them, right? Now they can remotely log into the system and they can see what is going on, right? They can even update software or, so yeah, the assistance is much easier, right? If you can do it remote, even for a company like us, like a classification society, vessels, in order for them to have insurance and get money from the banks, they need to classify their vessels. Somebody, third party, independent, needs to verify that they keep these vessels well, right? Within regulations. So if they make changes to vessels, for example, with DP, and they put on a different reference system and they are operating somewhere in Africa, close to Nigeria, before we had to send people on board, right? All the way over the world, try to get on board in a vessel in Nigeria. That's not only to test maybe a few hours to see, yes, everything is working again. You're approved, you can continue. Now we can remotely log in. We can get data from the systems. We can see everything is working correctly. We can verify this and we can say, okay, go ahead. This is approved, right? So instead of it costing a lot of money, a lot of travel, we can do it now remote. That's a big improvement.
I have this question because
Yes.
many people around me ask me, for example, I will come back to the aviation industry. Nowadays, you can pilot a plane. You even don't need any pilot. I mean, everything is automation doing a good job. But people say, sailing on the sea, it looks easier than on a plane. Why we didn't implement automation before? Why it's only now we are talking about it in 2024, and this is something you could implement in before?
Well, as I mentioned, we didn't have connectivity, right? So it was not possible to remotely monitor this. Okay. So there was no need, right, to develop these remote technologies. But now it is, right? So now if you say that, okay, we want to build a autonomous vessel, right, from the navigation side, that is one aspect, right? You need object detection, that you know what is going on, right? You need object identification. So then if you have detected something, that you can see what it is. You maybe need to get the kind of situational awareness picture. And based on that, you need kind of make decisions about collision avoidance, right? Algorithms that can safely maneuver. But you also, on the machinery side, need to make certain that these systems operate without human intervention, right? So you suddenly need to put in a lot of automation, right? So that these systems can work without human intervention. Because if you have a vessel without people, it has to work. And now they're developing this, right? From the machinery until simple systems like navigation lights. Or now there are requirements about hoisting a flag in certain cases. How are you going to do this, right?
Yeah.
So all these questions come up and solutions need to be found.
Okay.
Right? There's even a bell on the ship in case of fog, right?
Yes.
There's an old, right? Still requirement, but there are no people, right? So you have to make a physical arm to move the bell, or maybe something different. Right?
That's true, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question because Polly, you raised a point which is really interesting. Is do you see a lot of I would say exchanges or leverage of other industry in transportation of technology or way of doing that are then reapplied in shipping to fast track, for example, innovation, or because the automation was one aspect coming a lot from the airline industry. I mean, that industry, like just in terms of digitalization, has been quite advanced. Many people say that there's old system behind, but in the 70s, everything was kind of digitalized. There was already marketplace, which are called PDSs. So how do you see that in this industry?
I think it is really happening, right? I mean, big companies are looking at the airline industry and see how they've done it, right? This centralization and connectivity has already been solved by many other kind of industries, right? I mean, if you look at process plants where they had previously maybe had 10 plants all over the world with each their own control setting, now they have one control center monitoring this, right? So this connectivity solutions, data transfer solutions, about cybersecurity, all this is coming. Now, what I see, the recent developments I've seen is that if you have a control center, right, where you're going to connect maybe 40, 50, 60 vessels all over the world, right, to these centers. And in these centers, you will have different positions for maybe the navigator position or the, let's say, remote DPO position or engineering position. And you need each position to be able to connect to a vessel. It's a lot of data, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of systems you have on board need to suddenly be remotely controlled, right? Remote navigation, remote DP, remote machinery. So in order to work, I see that some companies are using technology from especially airline industry, right, on processing, and they're introducing it. The challenge is that the maritime industry is very conservative. The regulations build up on this conservative technology. So this has to change, right? Suddenly we need to look at, okay, can we allow this technology? What kind of requirements are we going to put on this technology, right? This is not going so fast, but it's happening, it's coming. I mean, just look at the control center. All these issues with the person operating there a vessel remotely, what kind of situational awareness would be required? How to interpret the information in the control center? How should it? This has been done in other industries for many years, right?
Yeah.
So now they're trying to transfer this knowledge to shipping. That's what is coming. And then look from a shipping perspective.
Okay, quite interesting. In terms of implementation, because I know that for ship owner, it's quite hard to implement digitalization because it's a traditional industry. So what can you say about implementation, or why it's so complicated, and how can we make it easier?
What I would say is that most shipping companies, as I mentioned, are struggling with is that they're very operational. They have been operating for the past 30 years in the same way they've always been operating, right? You have a fleet of vessels. You have on shore a superintendent that's responsible for maybe 3-4 vessels, right? You have a support organization on shore. And this superintendent is managing all the problems, and this is how it works. And now suddenly they have an opportunity to connect these vessels digitally to a centralized shore organization. And there you can see all the things that are going on in the fleet. So now they have to maybe look, what can we do with this, right? So that means they need to lift their view maybe 5, 10, 15 years ahead. And they need to kind of make a kind of vision for the future. How can they see their vision? And they need to make a strategic roadmap for digital transformation to see, okay, this is where we want to be 15 years from now. So what do we need to do with the vessels that we're going to acquire or building? If you're going to build new vessels now, and these vessels will live for maybe 25, 30 years, what kind of specification are you going to put on these vessels? If they in the future are going to maybe be part of a country remotely controlled fleet or an autonomous fleet, right? you need to think about that now. So the biggest issue for shipping companies is to make this transformation roadmap, this plan for where they want to be in the future. What kind of strategic goals do they have? What do they want to achieve? Is it cost reduction? Is it safety improvement? Is it efficiency? Is it environment, right? What are their strategic goals? And then how to get there? Because then they can slowly start to put in projects, initiatives that will slowly come together. Now there's all kind of projects ongoing, right? Nobody knows where it is heading a lot of times, right? So this roadmap to know where you want to go is essential. And shipping companies are not used to that. They don't really yet understand what digitalization can mean for them. That's the big challenge.
Okay.
And in your role, Jan, because you mentioned that you are teaching at university, you're assistant professor, do you see the universities getting ready? Because at the end of the day, the transformation is also, digitalization is about the culture. So
exactly. This is what is happening. And I think this is why I really enjoy teaching at the university, because there we have young students that want to work in a maritime environment. And I can see that these shipping companies, they are lacking this knowledge. They're lacking this, how to call it, this open-minded view on what is possible, right? So the students that come, I mean, what I work with shipping companies and how I help the management of a shipping company to understand what digitalization can mean for them and how to make a roadmap and all this, I do exactly the same for the students, right? So they get insight in what really goes on in the industry, right? What is important? What can digitalization do? What you can get out of it? How to implement this? So one of the major tasks they will have is they have to make a digital transformation strategy for a company of their choosing, right? That will be their job. And they have to work together as a group and they have to present and defend, right, the initiatives that they are doing. This is what would happen if they would work in a shipping company, right? So it's coming, it's really coming, but there's a big need for digital competence in shipping companies.
Yeah. Talking about those skills, I mean, I'm a student right now, so my classmates always, when I ask them what do you want to do after your studies, most of them, they are like quite focused on these traditional jobs because they don't know about the new jobs. What can you say about the new position available in the future about digitalization? What kind of new position we will have on young people should be aware of?
What is going to change in a shipping company, in a ship management company, right, is that the old jobs like superintendent, fleet manager, these jobs are going to change, right? Because before the superintendent had all the knowledge and all the what was going on. Now the control center will have this knowledge, right? So shipping will need people that understand the maritime industry, what is going on, but that also understand how to handle, let's say, data from vessels, how to analyze data, how to optimize, how to benchmark, all this kind of stuff that shipping companies have not been working with, right? I mean, if you would have a control center and you would take a captain from the fleet and put him in this control center, I'm not sure he would like it, right? Because this captain is used to be free, out in the open, not sitting 24/7 in a small space with only screens, right? So new kind of jobs will come in these control centers, in these shipping companies. On board, right? Before, it was people like operating everything. If we go look at remotely controlled vessels, you will need people with also this maritime education, but more like monitoring and understanding how automation performs, and that they can see when is it working well, when is it not working, when should I intervene, right? So this more digital understanding will be required. Okay. And of course, not only in shipping companies, but the maritime industry, there will be a huge demand on shipyards. They have to build autonomous vessels, right? They have to buy in autonomous technology. So it's where to start.
Yes.
I think students, if they can find a combination between understanding the basic of shipping and understanding how digitalization is going to impact, there will be lots of work. And I can see from the university, right, all these students that I have had, right, they now work in the shipping companies, right? Even in my own group at DNV, one of my previous students is now working within our section, right?
Okay.
So this is how it slowly comes, right? Because these young people, they bring this insight in innovation in technology with them, right? So that's how it's coming. Yeah.
Quite. If you want to say something, Landry, you can.
No, I think it's. I think one of the things I wanted to have a bit more information now was around the how you implement those digital technology. The implementation strategies you put in place, and one of the outstanding question for me is the challenge we have with new technologies is that you don't know what will be the winning technology or the winning approach. So you have to be very agile to test many things, and the organization needs to have that agility and also the willingness to test, fail fast, all those things. And the first question for me comes like, okay, how does that actually really maps in the maritime industry, based on what you said previously?
This is a big challenge because in the old days, you would say, I want to build this. You describe the functionality you want to provide, then you write a specification, and then you build it, right? And then you test it, and then you get it approved. I think this is not how it is working anymore. It's going much faster, right? It's testing, trying. But the challenge in maritime is there are very strict regulations about technology innovation. There are regulations for almost everything on board the vessel, right? Simple things like environmental requirements, right? If you would have a computer on shore, right, it just works, it stands still and it provides. But on board the vessel, there is vibration, there are shocks, right? There is a very aggressive maritime environment with regards to corrosion. There is electromagnetic influence of other systems, right? And this is operational safety, so it should be. So all these requirements are still valid, right? Also for the technology you develop. So there are many regulations that you need to comply with when you develop these systems. So you need somehow to find out when you develop at the same time, what are the regulations I should comply with, right? Because this has been built up in the maritime industry to provide safety of operation on board, right? If you have a navigation system, this is type approved, right? There are strict regulations what it should do. It is tested, it has been verified, and then you're allowed to use it. But if you develop new systems, it also should require all this testing and all this approval, right? This is a very tough process.
Okay.
It can be done, but it's demanding, right? So you need to be aware of it. So you cannot just make it and say, hey, it's working.
Yeah.
Then we from the classification society say, yeah, but how do you do this? Do you have redundancy? What if this fails? What is then your backup? What is, right? All this kind of discussions.
Yeah, it's very similar to aviation, in fact, because, when you take the plane, you see, I always make a joke out of this. You see the systems that looks like in the system of the 70s, but actually you have to know that to certify any piece, even your something to make tea or whatever, or coffee, it has to be certified. And so when you certify it, it's good. I mean, it's good money because then you're there, but it takes time to get it through. So that's
so technology qualification is a big part of this innovative process, right? I mean, in these projects that I've seen now, this technology or system qualification is a big part of the job. One thing is just making it and letting it work, but then proving that it is safe to use is also a big job. Requires a lot of documentation.
And you see that on the other side, on the certification, like we see in aviation, they're trying to make it a bit more agile, more smooth, more efficient. Do you see changes on the people who are the certifiers in trying to be more scalable?
I can see, I work, of course, within DNV on the advisory side, but I work very close together with my colleagues from the classification side, the people who have to review and follow these processes. And I see that they're adjusting because regulations have been built up over many years, right? And has proven to work. And now suddenly you get novel technology that does not fit within the current regulations. The current regulations say there must be alarms. Somebody must be able to interfere. But if there are no people on board, how are you going to do this, right? I mean, there are a lot of regulations that are assuming people there, but there are not written yet for not people being there. This is a challenge. So I can see that if you look from top down, and we maybe get to that, but you have IMO, you have flag states, you have classification societies. that all need to adjust to this new technology and how we're going to live with it. And what are we going to require so that it will be safe, right? I mean, the technology can make it possible, but you do not want to have big ships operating autonomous wherever all over the world without causing accidents, right? You must be certain that it works.
But
yeah.
But do you think like regulation is killing innovation? Because we know that the maritime industry is the most regulated industry in the world, one of the most. Maybe that's the reason why we are not so updated in comparison with other industries. What do you think about it?
I will not say it's killing it, because I can see there are big initiatives going on in IMO where they're now working on the mass code. And there are some signals saying this will come in 2025, maybe a little bit later, but they're working on it, right? They have now a kind of test code where they can use it. I can see that flag states have started to think about, hey, what kind of requirements are we going to put there and how are we going to allow this technology to be tested? So they are doing this, right, at the moment in the UK, in Norway, in Singapore. So this is really coming. Classification societies are working to making class notations for remotely controlled or autonomous vessels, but it is still a lot of work that needs to be done, right? So it's coming. At the moment, if you would speak with a company like Ocean Infinity, who is really pushing technology, they would maybe say, this is really difficult, right, to get these classification society, to get flag, to get IMO, to get that going, right? Because they want to know, just tell us what the requirements are and we will build it. But it's not clear yet, right?
Okay, yeah.
That's a little bit the challenge.
And just on the regulation, just for people to realize, and I mean, for us, it's always an eye opener. Can you just point a bit how complex it is, to this unification across the world? Because we discussed previously how that is challenging for, depending where the boat is, the flag, all those, those parameters. Can you just paint us with a concrete, a project or use case where this is just like a nightmare to sort out?
Well, just let's again take the example of Ocean Infinity, right? They operate vessels worldwide, right, with underwater operations where they maybe can search for airplanes that have gone down, or they have to map an area where they want to build a windmill park, right? All these kind of underwater operations. They have a control center in the UK, and they will have control centers other places in the world. They will operate vessels, let's say from Norway to the UK, for example. Then they have to comply with the regulations of Norway. What is Norway requiring from them when they operate remotely controlled vessels? What is the UK requiring from them? If they go from the UK to Norway, there must be an agreement between the UK flag and the Norwegian flag, kind of bilateral agreement. That takes time, right? Can maybe easily be a half year because they've never done it before. So they have to find out, okay, how are we going to do this? What are we going to require? What does IMO or international regulations think about this, right? So this is very time consuming. They have to operate within future IMO requirements. So they need to look at what is going on in IMO and what kind of requirements do we think are coming. Because if you develop a system which later on will not comply with the regulations that are coming from IMO, you missed it, right? Yeah, so all this is, and then even if you look at the control center, where is it located? Before, if you have a vessel, the captain on board is the boss, and you have a flag where the vessel is flagged. That is, in a way, from a legal perspective, your regulator, right? The flag is deciding what can be done on board the vessel. But now suddenly you have a control center where there's maybe a captain. But the vessel itself, there is nobody maybe on board, or maybe a few people. And if this control center is in the UK, what kind of requirements is Norway going to put to this control center in the UK? Or what if this control center would be somewhere in Africa, right? So all these kind of discussions, this is all like, okay, how are we going to deal with it?
Okay.
And this at the moment is a challenge. There needs to be then discussions between the different countries to make agreements on how to operate.
Okay. And not just to ask to make it more complex, but I mean, it's really, I ask those questions because I think it's kind of a huge opportunity for innovation. So that's why it's really interesting. But how does that then impact insurance? domain.
Well, if you have to insure this vessel, normally you would say that classification society has kind of regulations for this, right? And the classification society checks, make sure that the vessel and the owner is following these regulations with regards to technology development, building the vessel, right? Everything is according to the book. And then also the maintenance afterwards is done, and this is checked annually, right? That everything is okay. But how are you going to do this when there are no regulations at the moment for autonomous or remotely controlled vessels? This is not so easy, right? There are, IMO has a kind of, they have a regulation called MSC 1 Circular 1455, which is kind of alternative procedure for innovative technology, which is an all risk-based. So you can try to, using this procedure, you can try to use risk management to show that you have equivalent safety. But this is also a complicated process. So how will an insurer handle this, right? How will they, and even if you have a bank that wants to lend you money for this project, how are they make certain, right? Because if this, let's say you would have a oil tanker that is remotely controlled or autonomous, and you get a big accident, right? How this is going to be from a legal perspective, right? Who is in control? Who is responsible? Who is going to cover insurance? This is all.
Yes, because
so this is what the maritime industry is working with at the moment, right? How to do this.
Do you see a lot of initiative where there's kind of shadowing, like the old way of doing plus shadowed with the new technologies?
Yeah, I think that now what you see is if you build a vessel and you still have the technology available so that you can have regular crew, but in addition you have remotely controlled technology. So that means that you can start remotely controlling this vessel, but at any moment in time the crew can intervene and operate. If you would lose connectivity, they can just run the vessel in the old way, right? And then you can prove that you more and more that you can operate these vessels without intervention. This is also with Lavik Oppedal, right? With these autonomous ferries, there will be crew, but they can prove and test that they can do it automated. That's the whole goal. And if they manage to show, right, that, hey, look, we are operating these ferries and there's no human intervention for the past half year, then you build confidence that it is actually working, right? Because I mean, one thing is also public opinion, right? Who wants to travel with a ferry or a plane without a captain, right? So you need maybe somebody there to show that in case something happens, we can intervene. But this is how they're going to do it.
Maybe one day children would say, you know that in the old days they had people actually controlling the plane or the boat.
Yeah. So it means that we need, in terms of responsibility, we need to see how can I say, like, redefine everything, because like currently, if you have an issue on board the machine, the captain will talk to the chief engineer, say, did you make this checklist? Did you? But with the digitalization, it will be another story.
It will be totally different.
That's why.
But there's also different with like, say, you have now companies like Fugro, right? They have vessels up to 10, 15, 20 meters, small vessels without crew. But these small vessels will not be, it's not so critical because they will not have a big accident, right? If something goes wrong.
Okay.
So there are other regulations for these smaller vessels. It's up to 24 meters and bigger vessels. So it's easier to have remotely controlled smaller vessels. And they are doing this. They're operating like this, right? So that's one thing. But if you have the bigger vessels, then it's a different ball game.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit now about money, about investment, because of course it's good to have good initiative about digitization, but it's very cost. In terms of cost, it's quite high. So what kind of initiatives you have? It can be public initiatives from in Europe mostly, but depending the country, but on public, but as well private. If we have some opportunities for those companies.
Well, there have been, and there are still ongoing, a lot of initiatives, research projects on remotely controlled or autonomous technology. Within EU, I also see there are a lot of projects in Korea, Japan, that are ongoing. So these are like more development projects where the industry is developing. They get maybe funding from EU, where all kind of environments participate. So this is one way of developing technology and testing and getting it going. We have industry projects here in Norway, for example, Yara Birkeland. Right, we have ASCO, where they have the drones here between Horten and Moss. as I mentioned, Ocean Infinity, right? They are building these vessels. We have Fugro, which is doing smaller vessels. In Norway, you have companies like Reach, Zebus, Hike that are developing smaller vessels, maybe smaller ferries, right? So these are ongoing projects. I know that DNV and Samsung have a MOU on development of autonomous technology and remotely control center. But also my company DNV, which is owned by a foundation, they have, I don't know exactly the amount of percentage of the turnover, but every year they use a certain amount of percentage of the turnover on R&D. So we have an R&D unit that is developing, looking at autonomous technology and also on regulations. And of course, as I mentioned, the Norwegian Road Administration, right? I mean, they have put these requirements for autonomous technology in the next tender. This will mean that it will be much more expensive, right? But in this way, they will push technology development. So there are many initiatives ongoing all over the world, I can see. So yeah, it looks really good.
But in terms of key player, I mean, because we have Kongsberg, this is very renowned company for digitization, but like for more little companies, startups, is it possible still to make a step to digitization in maritime?
Yeah, I mean, you have companies like Hike and Cbus, right, that are developing technologies. Hike is developing, if I understood it correctly, their own autonomous technology. So it is, right? They can, but it's, I would say, of course, companies like Kongsberg have a big advantage, right? Because they have all the different automation technology that you need in a kind of combined system. So of course they have the power, right, to invest.
Yeah. Yes, and sometimes this is the ship owners who try to innovate. For example, we have Damen Shipyard. I know they're doing a quite good job in terms of finding some digital process solution in their own fleet of building vessels.
I mean, Samsung is doing the same, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the development that they invest in autonomous technology because they see that, hey, the vessels they're building in the future, they can offer this to customers, right? And if you look in the industry, right, I mean, at the moment, autonomous vessel, I'm not aware of any autonomous vessel that is really, how to say, working and has been approved, right? That they have tested object detection, object identification, right? So that they really can replace, let's say, the captain on the ship with regards to lookout, right? So I'm not aware of any project where this has been really completely tested and says everything is working as it should.
Yeah.
Right? They have come to a certain level, but still not quite yet there, right? More testing and more development will be needed.
Okay, so
but it's coming.
Because I imagine collaboration, it's quite you cannot do it alone. You need to have different actors around you. Is it like I mean, when we are talking about collaborations, because as we mentioned, Kongsberg is a big player, but like, is it like still possible for, again, to come back to my question, for like startups or people want to implement this, to make this little step in towards digitalizations?
But from a digitalization perspective, there are many things you can do as a startup.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just autonomous vessels, right? I
For
mean,
sure.
if you look at the ship, you have electronic logbooks, right? In the old days, everybody was writing by hand. Now you can have electronic logbooks, right? And the data is, there are, from energy efficiency perspective, there are many different companies making solutions to monitor or reduce fuel, right? So there are an enormous potential of, I mean, if you look at all these software companies, right, that are producing, for shipping, it's an enormous market, right? If you look at, for example, the dry docking process for a shipping company, right? I mean, a dry docking easily could cost $1, $2, $3 million, right? So it's a very short time, you use a lot of money. So to support this whole dry docking process, a shipping company should have some kind of software that is helping them through this process, right? For the corporation.
Yes.
Many shipping companies still don't have this, right?
Yes, you helped me for my questions, because it was quite hard to make it. So I mean, like, for those like little actors, is it still possible to collaborate with big actors, or big actors are quite do it everything internally?
Well, the challenge is that, let's say you would make a product where you would be depending on data from a Kongsberg system.
Yeah.
Then you would need to interface with this system, right? And then Kongsberg can say, okay, we can make this interface for you, but this will cost so much. Or maybe the ship owner has already agreed this and has this data available. So who has ownership of the data, right? Because all these big companies, it's not a kind of standardized data stream, right? They all have their own data format, their own way of doing it. So it's not uniform, right? So this interfacing with the data on board is a challenge.
Okay.
So if you're a small company and you're depending on data from the vessel, you need to interface with all these different systems on board.
Okay.
So, yeah, it is possible, but it's a challenge again.
Okay.
Just a question on startup on the collaboration, because it's a quite important thing. A lot of startups, they're looking at maritime like, should we go into it or not? And it's true, like in those industry, again, taking the parallel of aviation, it's very challenging to be able to have that collaboration and to have an impact, because those startups at some stage, they want to become big as well. They don't want just to stay. So from your perspective, is there a kind of blue ocean where startup have their space where, they would be better at addressing it, at least at this stage of the process, rather than a large company?
Yeah, you could look at, sorry, if you look at digitalisation, I think we need to divide these initiatives between operational systems on board that have to do with the operation of the vessel, with navigation, with machinery, all this kind. That is very much regulated. That is extremely difficult to get approved. So that then is difficult as a startup to comply with all these regulations. It's possible, but it's a challenge. But on the other side, if you have, let's say, administrative systems or support systems that are not directly operational, but they can contribute to improving, making things more efficient, there is not this regulatory requirements. Then you just need to show it works, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is much more easy to come into the market. But if it has to do with, like, say, an operation of the vessel, then you meet all these specific requirements that are related to safety.
Okay.
So,
I know that DNV has a venture arm, but is this
Correct.
something which is more and more deployed in big companies to have some kind of ecosystem of a portfolio of startups on which they can then leverage at some stage to bring that innovation and transformation?
I know they started a few years ago, this venture arm. I'm not working with this, so I cannot share with you any insights on why they're doing this or what the idea behind it is. I know they're doing it. I presume that this is also for DNV and wait to see what is going on in the industry, what kind of developments are going on. But I'm not involved in that part, so I cannot share anything there.
Okay. And anything you've seen also from your professor arm on the accelerators of startups and so on, where startups are involved with big companies? There's a real partnership on board, active partnership, where the big companies really helping those startups to get to their product market fit, for example.
I can remember from my time when I was working in Hague, and when these requirements for the testing of ballast water were coming there, I can remember that Hague was actively participating with companies developing this technology, and they were investing in these companies. So I can see this is happening. I know that other shipping companies are also doing this, but I don't have any other examples of that.
Okay. Yeah, I ask this question because on my side of the business, so I work a lot with investors and so on. That's always the question is, okay, if I invest in a startup, I mean, what is their likelihood to have an impact, and have an ROI on their investment? And that's really challenging, because a lot of people see still the maritime as a very closed industry, which is really hard to get in, to get traction, basically.
It helps to understand the maritime business, and especially it helps to understand how it is all regulated. You need to understand this if you want to develop products or companies for the maritime industry, because you're going to meet these regulations at some stage.
Okay.
So that's quite essential.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, quite interesting. So I think now we're going to switch to the last part of the episode, more to talk about for just a short part about for young people, because I always like ending the episode to help young generation. What kind of advices on tips can you give to young people who want to start working in the maritime industry and try to give them some new vision of the future? Not saying, new kind of jobs, new kind of way of thinking about the industry.
I mean, if I would look ahead in the future, if I would look 10, 20 years ahead, I'm pretty certain that there will be much more remotely controlled autonomous type vessels. I think it will start with, as we now look at the ship and the machinery side, we now have something which they call temporarily unmanned machinery room, right? So everything is automated. There are people on board, but there's nobody in the machinery space going to check, right? If the chief engineer is sleeping in his cabin, something happens, the alarm goes, and he can go and have a look. I think this will, as a first start, also with the bridge. They will have kind of autonomous navigation autopilot, kind of autopilot that maneuvers the vessel on a certain track. And at the same time, it monitors the situational awareness, right? That it can see what is coming and it can give an alarm. It can predict kind of the need for, and maybe then also give an alarm to the navigator who's maybe sleeping in his cabin that, hey, there is a target coming close. This could potentially be an issue. You need to come and have a look. I think this temporarily unmanned bridge will come as a kind of first in the industry. And then remotely controlled will also more and more come. Autonomous vessels, completely autonomous vessels, like big vessels, that will take more time. I think this is maybe 10 years plus before that maybe really comes around the corner. If you look at young people, I think they should try to get a combination of how to learn how the industry works, understand the maritime industry, how this business works with the shipping companies, with the charterers, people who provide the logistics input to the shipping process, understand the shipyards, understand the industry that is delivering technology or systems to these shipyards. And then at the same time, understand like, hey, how is this innovation process working? What is digitalisation potentially doing for them? And how can they help shipping companies to introduce digitalisation? This is maybe the key. This is what shipping companies lack. They don't exactly understand how they can use it. And I maybe generalize a little bit too much, but one of the weak points that I've seen in shipping companies is project management. They're not good at managing projects because normally the people in the shipping company, they get then the role as a kind of, okay, you are the project manager for this initiative, but at the same time, you're a superintendent and this regular operations always get priority.
Okay.
So there's never like a continuous push on this project, right? So shipping companies have normally a lot of initiatives and nobody really knows what is the initiative, what would the time, what is the cost, when should it be ready, what should it deliver, and how far have we come, right? This overview is a lot of times lacking. So they need people who know how to manage projects, how to build up a project, both with regards to time, cost, and scope.
Okay.
That is, so if I would give a recommendation to a company that wants to do a digitalization initiative, don't let anybody who is part of the line management, who is busy with the operations, handle this project. That will not work.
Okay.
You need a dedicated project manager for this initiative. This is what students can learn.
Yeah.
Know how to run projects, understand the shipping, understand technology. That is what shipping companies need in the future.
Quite good. Thank you.
If you're interested in project management, right?
Sure. It's one part of a big part of the industry, of course. Thank you, Jan.
Yeah.
Thank you, both of you. If you want to add something before we end the episode, it's the moment. I think we are all good.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you, Jan, for this really interesting insight. It's really great to have such expertise, shared.
Yeah, it's. I like the topic, and if there are any students who want to know more about this in Ålesund in Norway, there's a course, international course on digital shipping, so they can have a look.
Thank you both of you. Thank you, Jan, for your insights. You bring again a lot of value. I wish you all a very pleasant day